And for those of us, you've been faced with the energy trilemma all day: resilience, affordability, getting the carbon down. I hate to complicate matters. There's a biodiversity crisis happening at the moment, losing a lot of species, losing our connection with country. So we must walk and chew gum at the same time. This is the panel where we get to do, I think maybe it was Erin in our last panel who said that there are real impacts as we make changes to the real world around us in infrastructure. We have to develop the ports, we have to put offshore wind farms up, we need new supply chains around fuels. So this panel is our opportunity to grapple directly with that.
So there's two things that we're involved in at the moment which are relevant here. So one is the transition out of diesel for the agriculture sector, and the second is putting in place a monitoring framework for the Murray-Darling Basin. So quite different things, but related. The impacts that we're hearing a lot about really through today as well includes the impacts of infrastructure going into regional Australia, the impacts on prime ag land as this described. The reality is that a lot of those are really dealt with in more marginal settings than prime ag land settings. Certainly from impacts in northern Queensland, there's a lot more direct impact on natural capital, environmental assets. But on the whole, at aggregate nationally, the trade-off between that infrastructure and the aggregate biodiversity and natural capital of the country is probably quite small. I've got some colleagues from CSIRO in the audience and I'm hoping you're going to back me up on that finding. What's more significant is where we're seeing the shift in the fuel space. Australia is a source of biomass for a lot of the sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel, not just in Australia but internationally. And the ability to produce the scale of that future fuel really needs to be understood in terms of impact on potential land use, that fuel versus energy versus food crop debate. Mm-hmm. And the sort of the high level, very quick back of the envelope calculations that we're looking at just earlier today were, the order of around 15% of Australian agricultural land for horticulture might be consumed by feedstock into a renewable diesel or SAF. So it's quite significant in that respect. Mm-hmm. So I think the trade-offs there really more fall into that dimension than so much the infrastructure.
So it's a good reminder, you'll have the direct impact of where the infrastructure is, but there is a supply chain, there's a whole economy that goes around energy transition. And you say that maybe some of the impacts are on marginal land. Another way to think about marginal land is an opportunity for nature restoration, isn't it? Rather than, because this story is not just about protecting things, but it's taking a restoration step because we won't get away with nature positive with just fencing things off.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the things that some of the renewable energy zone work that we've seen is looking at reclassifying some of that agricultural land to really understand what is prime ag land as what is more marginal land. Mm-hmm. And then you've got, of course, then the rehabilitation of other sites, etc., which can also be used.
All right. So are there any projects or types of projects that are particularly problematic from a nature point of view, from your perspective? You're first up, Cassian.
Oh, that's a long list.
Just top one. Problematic projects, ones that are most challenging for environment and nature.
I'm going to give you the best of my unprepared remarks.
Yes.
It's such a multi-dimensional problem. I don't have a good answer for that, I must say.
I would say, so there is population pressure and we do need to address it. And there's housing in this state. And so I really like the approach that the government is taking when they're looking at, infill and brownfield development. As many of you might know, we have significant areas of contaminated land in the state, which are currently unoccupied, and we go, well, how do we occupy? And some of them, for example, in the Goldfields area, in Bendigo and Ballarat, they're close to the city centre, but at the moment they're completely unusable. So rather than allowing development to infiltrate, as we have done in all of our major cities, to keep going out further and further, which has been supported by vehicles, motor vehicles, and the growth of those and the effectiveness of those, we're looking at increasing the density. So that's problematic about how do we deal with the contamination that exists there? Do we dig it and remove it, or do we encapsulate it? But we do have the answers, and it's been done all around the world. And I will say our organisation has been, this is EPA, been revisiting this so we can make fast, expedient decisions to help accelerate those choices. That's a much, much better choice than allowing our population and our housing density to keep rippling further and further out, because we then chew up all the beautiful rural lands around. It doesn't help with transportation, because transportation works most effectively when there's population density, and it's much more inviting then to a developer to put in transport, to build a train line or to do that sort of thing, because they know they're going to get a return on the money. And there's much less adverse environmental impacts, and it's much more efficient for dealing with waste, and people will use public transport instead of driving. So there's heat. That to me is our big challenge. That let's be really pragmatic about how we reuse brownfield sites. We'll never get the perfect solution, but we need to just make sure that any risk associated with that, we just cut off the exposure pathways rather than just ripple out and just level the bush, because it's easy. That is easy, but it's not necessarily the best choice for a whole range of reasons.
So the worst projects are the ones that allow endless sprawl,
which is what we've done.
Valuing our land and our environment.
Yeah, and we've done that because it's easy, and we've had motor vehicles, but now we understand the impacts of motor vehicles and the emissions, which become depositions, and the particulate matter from diesel vehicles is a problem. So if we can keep our cities more compact, like many European cities, that's actually quite compact, which means public transport works perfectly.
Your turn, Cassian.
All the things he said. Yeah.
Coming back. So it looks like energy is off the hook. This is something for your drinks afterwards, so you can have a discussion about what you think the worst of it. I'd also like to say, in the synopsis for this session, we did talk about the future of EPBC Act reform. We don't have environmental approvals specialists here on this panel.
I'm sure there's some in the room. Yeah.
If you're an environmental impact assessment or a planner, could you put your hand up?
They might not want to admit it.
There's one, Natalie. No one else. Everyone talk to Natalie at drinks. The EPBC Act reform is about becoming more strategic about what we set the metrics for developers are, so that it can be outcomes focused. Hopefully being able to set nature positive ambitions at the federal level, and then somehow harmonizing that with state objectives as outcomes.
I think the harmonisation is the biggest issue.
Yeah, so this is a very, very important reform which people have promised me. It's in the very first quarter of a new government as it comes in. So that's something to watch out for. We've got 2 minutes left, so let's just sum up. For you, Cassian, what kind of project do you want to be involved with that you think could restore and deliver for environment while also helping us transition to a low carbon resilient future?
Well, I think that this is literally off the cuff.
Dream project.
Unsolicited question. Look, I see a huge opportunity at the moment in this liquid fuel space has been talked about a lot, and I think that the opportunity to work with big oil, the refineries required to actually transform biomass into a renewable diesel, it's in the order of $1.5 billion each. We heard from BP earlier on the panel this morning about some of the challenges that they've had with getting their Western Australia plant retrofitted around that. So the infrastructure required to aggregate biomass in Australia into a biocrude to get that into those bigger refineries and do that in a way that manages how land is used, manages how the crop types and the farming systems are interleaved between food and energy, that we avoid monoculture crops and further land clearing for energy crops. All of those things I think are really critical to the overall transition, and it's not talked about a lot. Yeah. There's been events in this last month where we've had very prominent organisations, firms that you would normally see sponsoring events like this, who talk about this the biomass opportunity, and no one's really giving much consideration to actually what that looks like on the ground, how you actually do that, and all of the regulatory barriers associated with that at both federal, state and local levels. So I think that would be a fascinating project to anyone who wants to get us to do that. Happy to do that.
There's a low carbon liquid fuels roadmap.
That's right, yeah.
So minds are being turned. For you, Mark, you get the final word. What's your dream project?
My dream project is, and I've thought about it for a while, is land tip mining. So land tips around all the states. We've been sticking resources and minerals and all sorts of neat stuff into there for 100, 150 years. And at some point,
Let's mine them for critical minerals.
It will become cheaper and easier to go back and extract as part of a full sort of circular economy the resources that we've thrown away over many, many decades. So that, to me, would be a really neat, exciting piece of work to do, because it would mean we really are moving absolutely into we're recycling the past, but in a really good way.
Well, thank you, Cassian. Thank you, Mark.